Hi, I'm going to do a little presentation here about teaching students to identify fake news. Just as soon as I get my slideshow running. There we go. So, um, last fall I became concerned as fake news crept into my social media feed and my students' papers. I was using the CRAP test, and I do ask students to even not just use the CRAP test to make a score, but I like them to take the CRAP test and write a paragraph about the results so they really think about it and record how they got there. But they were still coming up with fake news in many cases because they just didn't really pay close attention. But I wanted to talk to them about the potential for there being fake news out there, make them more aware of it, and give them some tools for identifying it beyond what the CRAP test affords, because the CRAP test doesn't really make a distinction between something that's just poorly done or unprofessional or a personal blog or satire and something that's truly fake news that is made with the intention of deceiving for malicious purposes or in order to make money by pushing emotional buttons and getting people to read. Of course, fake news is not new. You will all remember the Inquirer. It's still out there and still publishing some pretty wacky stories, as are several other supermarket tabloids. Um, but you're all probably also aware that fake news has become very prominent and the consequences have become real. We know for a fact that a conspiracy theory that was published in fake news sources led to a very misguided man opening fire in a pizzeria, and he, of course, is facing some very serious consequences in his life and is very regretful that he listened to the fake news story. We also are probably aware that actress Whoopi Goldberg was threatened after a false report circulated about her. Her family had their lives threatened, in fact. The consequences also extend to the national and international scene, where we have decision makers influenced by people who have believed fake news, that potentially decision makers chosen by people who have believed fake news. And so, are we making the best decisions if we allow fake news to proliferate? So, obviously not. So, we need to work on that. So, how do we know when to question what we read? Well, fake news sites are frequently produced abroad. Fake news sites steal each other's stories, they steal news images, they alter and splice news images from other sites. They don't explain their political biases or the mission, and they don't have a paywall. To take each of those individually. And you'll note there are some citations at the bottom. I just put for a web address citation for the purposes of this PowerPoint slideshow. However, I do have a bibliography that I will include for the English department site. There have been some notorious foreign producers of fake news. Macedonia, the country Georgia, Russia, even Iceland has got into the fake news game. Just about any country does produce it, but there are some places where it's become sort of a game, a trend for young people or those strapped for cash to put up a fake site with the hope of attracting advertising profit and making a little extra money without doing very much. I have linked to the country codes for URLs at the address at the bottom of the screen there. That's a government site and put up by NASA, obviously. And that will give you the country codes like MK for Macedonia. I think G-O might be Georgia, I can't really remember, but they aren't all easy to guess, but you can find them out by looking them up. And there are also some U.S. U.S. codes, URL codes that may be suspicious, like the .cos tend to be newer and therefore less well tested. Fake news sites steal stories. They aren't bound by ethical constraints. They want stories that sell. So they're going to steal from each other primarily because they're looking for information that is going to push emotional buttons or alarm people. So they get a lot of hits. They aren't interested in truth in most cases. And they aren't monitored by any sort of overseeing body. There's no net police, and when they're going across national boundaries, there's really not a lot anyone can do to stop them from stealing from somebody in another country. Some of them have limited abilities in the language they produce, or for the sites they produce. So, you have kids that speak just a little English, but are copying English news stories. Because they steal information, copying a couple of lines into Google and looking to see if you get the exact same story in a couple of sites is a good tell for whether it's fake news or not. Because while real news sites will often have the same story, they will have different wording unless they're using the same news service, in which case you'll see the byline is the same. If it's, for example, an Associated Press story, it might appear in 2 newspapers, but it will be from a legitimate source. They'll have paid for it. If it's in 2 sites that meet some of these other criteria, I would be suspicious, especially some of the next ones. If they steal images too, reputable news sources take their own photos or credit their original sources, but theft is cheaper than taking your own photos. Think about it. If you're a news service and there is a massive fire in the suburbs 50 miles from your office, it costs a little money to send somebody out there to take a picture. It doesn't cost anything to steal it. Real news sources frequently have their photographs stolen from them by these fake providers, fake news sources. You can reverse Google image search or search recent news about the subjects to find out if the image was stolen from mainstream media, or you may just recognize it. That's usually the case for me. I'll notice that it was in a newspaper story I've seen before, and does not belong to the newspaper that it is printed in. So if it's some off-beat news site, be suspicious. I see this in Facebook posts all the time. It'll be from some weird news source, and it'll be somebody else's photo. Fake news sites alter and splice images from other sites. So editing photos takes time, but it's cheaper than paying a photographer. As we said before, so they are spending a little more time, but sometimes they can make a story up and make it more convincing by giving photographic evidence. You just have to pay attention to some of the tells that things are spliced. For instance, in the bottom here, we have the Whoopi Goldberg story where she insulted the Navy SEAL's wife, and of course it was a fake story. And if you look carefully, you'll note that they are not at all, these are not at all related. These are pictures stolen from CNN, and from a news program or a talk program that Whoopi Goldberg is on. I'm afraid I don't know the television show off the top of my head, but the, uh, the images weren't even taken for the story, um, and that was one hint that it was probably fake. And of course, the others were the placement. That one was actually from Iceland, um, and the inflammatory nature of the story. Um, Unlike real outlets, fake news sites don't explain bias or mission. Um, so if you look here, I've got a list of the news sites that I thought of first, and a non-news site as well. So CNN has an about page. Washington Post has on their opinions page their editorial policy. The LA Times has an about page. The Onion has an about page. It's as satirical as the rest of the Onion, and your students won't get it, but it does have an about page. And that's because they do want you to know what they are about, these reputable publications, whereas a fake news site would not be interested in having its reputation um, upheld by having an editorial policy. It's much more convenient to hide biases and shift with the wind if you're just trying to make money. And it's much more convenient to pretend that you are an unbiased source and not go to the trouble of writing an about page if you're trying to spread inflammatory information and malice is your goal. Fake news sites don't have a paywall, as you're probably aware. You hit your 10th story on most large newspaper sites, and you're going to hit a paywall. They're going to say, oh, you've read your 10 sample stories this month. You have to pay for a subscription now. A lot of smaller papers don't allow you to read anything but the classified ads without a payment. And that's because on-site investigation and photography take time and money. So many news sites are going to require payment. There are also some like NPR that requests donations. The Guardian in the UK is a very well-known, well-respected publication. It requests donations. And some just limit views for non-subscribers, but we'll let most people get their fill for a month, but do have a subscribing core that helps fund the paper. They do make money from advertising too, but they don't exclusively rely upon it in most of these cases. Fake news sites exclusively rely upon ads, so they almost never have a paywall. Now, a couple things before we go. There is a malice test attached. It's a test I made for my students so they could run through the questions and food for thought on the malice test as they look at potential fake news and respond to those ideas with writing and I hope think more critically about fake news. And also I've sent a bibliography if you're interested in reading some of the same stories about fake news that I have been reading lately. There are some things that I have relied on more heavily than others in the production of this. You may have noticed an NPR article at the in the footnote of several of these pages, and that appears on there. And there are several other very good stories about fake news and interviews with those who have made their living on fake news for a while. So, in parting, from weirdfacts.org, which I I'm pretty sure is not all that great an organization, but I would really like to believe that there is this fountain in Italy, and I would like to go there someday. And I hope that you all may join me. Thanks a lot, and goodbye.